Zimbabwe has just experienced its worst state violence in more than a decade. On January 13, Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa announced that his government would hike the price of fuel by more than 150%, way beyond the means of the average Zimbabwean. He said that the price hike would curtail rampant illegal currency and fuel trading activities, but instead it fueled protests across the nation. Protests which turned ugly in some places. Civilians blocked roads, looted some shops, and law enforcement authorities responded with brutal, overwhelming force. They blacked out the internet to limit online coordination of these protests, and quite possibly to also limit real-time dissemination of the information about these protests, as well as the subsequent government crackdown. According to human rights organizations, at least 12 people have been killed, hundreds have been injured from assaults, and 78 people have incurred gunshot wounds. According to Amnesty International, more than 1,000 people, including minors, have been detained after being arrested on trumped-up charges or brought before courts in hearings that do not meet fair trial standards. Hundreds have been denied bail. Amnesty International said some women were reportedly raped, and that children as young as 11 years old were detained on frivolous charges. The Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission said that law enforcement authorities engaged in systematic torture of protesters. The torture was designed to ensure that no one else dares to challenge the government in any form in the future. Year after year, Zimbabweans hope that their fortunes will improve, and year after year, their hopes are dashed by a brutal dictatorship. Last year, Zimbabweans voted in their first ever elections that didn't have dictator Robert Mugabe on the ballot. But his comrades stole that election, and when the electorate protested against the results, the government dispatched the army to forcibly stop them, killing some of them in broad daylight. When will Zimbabwe become free and independent? The Plain Truth, which is the predecessor of the Trumper magazine, once interviewed Ian Smith, the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, before independence. Ian Smith was far from perfect, but during that interview, he made some comments that are proving to be more and more profound today. Talking about leadership, he said, "We have always had standards which we believe people should achieve before they participate in government. After all, government is supposed to be responsible, and we believe that people should qualify to show a certain degree of responsibility, a certain degree of civilization before we allow them to take part in government." Anyone can agree that Zimbabwe's leaders lack the responsibility and the qualifications required to take part in government. And broadly speaking, every government in this world lacks the responsibility and the qualification that God requires to take part in government. That is why God is right now preparing for what the Bible calls the kingdom of God, which is the government of God, which He will soon establish on this earth. To learn more information about this subject, request your free copy of Mystery of the Ages by Herbert W. Armstrong.